Roll up, roll up. Wow, Mark. Have you brought all these people with you? I've just seen the buses dropping everybody off. Afternoon. There's some spaces in the middle here or at the back. Wow. Thank you all for staying on, not having your dinner and running. So we're going to get going this afternoon. I'm just going to look at my mood. I don't think I've got any. Oh, I have got an announcement, haven't I? Internet's broke. So Wi-Fi's down. So we're going to be recording, for obviously we can't live stream. So we'll be making the recordings of the sessions this afternoon to make it available. You might find that by using your internet for Slido, we are going to try and use Slido, but you might find it a bit slow because of everybody just requiring use of the kind of stuff that's in the air rather than the Wi-Fi stuff. So yes, Tinternet is down. And it probably won't go back up for the rest of the day, so just to be aware of that. Wow. Come on, Claire. Hurry up. Anything else, Mahmouda? My goodness me. How are the eclairs? I hear there was an eclair. If anybody's talking to Mahmouda a bit later on, she's coughing a lot because she inhaled one. Sorry, Mahmouda. Welcome back, everybody. So I'm Karen Bradley. I work at the strategy unit as well, and I've got the afternoon slot to hopefully keep everybody in the auditorium awake because you've made it through day one, and how fantastic was that? The DJs, you made it through the DJs. I hear there was some dancing for one. Not for the other, but we're not going to mention that, will we, Mark? You have DJ number 2 in front of you in a minute, so to talk to you. But before we get to Mark, everybody, thank you very much for coming back. Like Peter said this morning, please do stay on for the last presentations because people really appreciate you staying. I know it's tempting to get your transport home after a long 2 days, and especially a really informative 2 days like these have been. But please, if you can, please do stay on. Everybody will really appreciate it. You've got this session now, our keynote speaker for this afternoon, who I'll introduce in a moment, and then you go into the separate rooms as you've done before for the rest of the afternoon's talks. And then I think there's a goodbye and thank you in here, Mahmouda, at the end. So please do come back just before we finish. So I'm going to introduce you then to Marc Farr, DJ number 2 from last night, those of you that were in the milieu of the networking evening. And I've known Marc for a few years now. I think pre-COVID, when I first met Marc, when we as a strategy unit were doing some work on population health management. Do you remember that? And I got to talk, I think I got to interview you about the work that you're doing down in East Kent way. And I was really struck by 3 things when I first spoke to Marc. Well, number 1, here was an analyst in a really senior role in, leading the way at board level from an analytics perspective. So something relatively rare, as was then, potentially still now. The second thing was, I just thought, oh gosh, here's this person who works in healthcare, but really cares about what's going on outside. Sorry, works in an acute hospital, but really cares about what's going on outside the hospital. And I remember being really struck by that because that was quite unusual from the interviews that I'd carried out as that piece of work. And my background's hospital work, and I know that we don't always think about the things that happen outside a hospital. So I was just really struck, Marc, that here was this person in this really influential influential analytics role who was talking about the things that happened outside the hospital and what job he could do to make healthcare better at the whole. And then my third thing that really struck me was, I can't remember exactly what the project was, but I do remember it was women's healthcare. So again, and I was just like, at that point, it got me. Do you know what I mean? I was at fan club forever. You've offered me your kind of signature after this. But I was in the Marc Farr fan club from then onwards because it's so rare for people to be focusing on women's healthcare. But I've seen lots of it today and over the last 2 days. So that's just absolutely brilliant. In the last 5 years, we're seeing that shifting change. So with that, Marc, please come and talk to us about data. And I think it's data and stuff in it or something. Data analytics, stupid. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for all coming and staying, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's lovely when people turn up when you're going to talk, when they know it's you, and particularly if they've seen you before. So I'm not sure if after last night I'm physically and mentally ready for this, but we'll kind of give it a try. And interesting last night, this was taken moments before I built a series of steps to climb out of the car park that we perceived ourselves to be locked in. And it was a really funny moment. You know that cartoon where there's someone sort of pushing on a door that says pull door ahead of you? And we literally walked the perimeter after packing Andy's car and saw all these padlocks on all the doors. And it was like, well, and I was thinking, I reckon I could get over this fence. And then Andy just pushed the gate open and we just walked through it. I'm again really, really grateful, and I think it's a real privilege to be invited to speak at this, because this is the big event. So thank you, Peter, and everyone in your team for putting this together, because I know it's really, really hard work, and we haven't had the voice that we should have had, but we are absolutely coming out into the light now. So to come along and see it, to be the oldest person in the room is actually really encouraging. Actually, because I've got a really, really clear 5-year plan, like really clear. It's a bit like Martin Pitts. It's really clear. So I just need all of you to want to do this, and it's hard. So all this is going to be a bit, and I found this and I quite liked it, is I'm going to give you some free advice from an old person, and if some of it sticks, happy days. And if it didn't, it's only about 28 minutes of your life. There was a bit of subliminal advertising there. I don't know if you noticed that. So for those of you who've got access to pen and paper in front of you, I'm conscious that I'm the speaker after lunch, and I'm conscious that, and I didn't go for the eclairs because my blood sugar at the moment, given last night, I would be, the energy in the room would be me falling off of the stage. So if you've got a pen and paper, please draw a triangle like that. Okay. You can add the caption if you want, but you don't have to. And there will be prizes. So after this, come and find me at the stand. We've got some AFA bits and pieces we can give out. But draw your triangles, and I'll assume that you're ready. And if you haven't got pen and paper, well, you're just too young and cool to be here anyway. Okay, so here we go. Let's try something. Who's that on the left? Louder? Jonah Hill. That was somewhere in the middle. There we go. There we go. Okay. Who's that on the far side? That is his therapist, and his name is Close. That's Phil Stutz on the left. So a really good documentary. If you do nothing else after HACA, go to Netflix and watch the Stutz documentary. Okay? Jonah Hill has a long history of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, all sorts of things. It's a really, really good program to watch. So hands up who during COVID developed absolutely mild to moderate mental health problems. Okay, found it very difficult to go back to a physical place of work. Thought I can absolutely do my job at home, obviously. It's really worth watching. And I really like this concept. He's got a number of similar ones. And they're really simply illustrated with cartoons. there's literally, if you don't realise until you're relatively old, and not quite as old as I am, but I'm fairly stupid, that when you get on a plane, the sun's always out because it goes above the clouds. The sun's above the clouds. I know. So he does a really good cartoon, which is if you're having a really bad day, this shall pass. The sun will come out again. And there's a whole series of really nice episodes on this program. Okay. And one of the simple things he talks about, if you are worried about yourself, is just so Phil Stutz is famous for not being the traditional physiotherapist of just listening to you and going, "Hi Hugh, just talk to me." And at the end I'll go, "Great, see you next week, 50 quid an hour." He felt like he had to give something back to you. He had to give you a product as a therapist. So he's developed a series of self-help models, if you want to call them that. And these are just some of them. And we're going to use this one today a little bit. So if you are in a darker place, you can do some obvious things. If you're physically in quite a good place, you'll probably be mentally in quite a good place. They will correlate on any number of levels. So get yourself out there, get some fresh air. If you're working at home, flex your day, go to the gym, bend your day, get yourself out there, walk the dog, whatever it takes, okay? Surprise, surprise, being amongst other people like this, and this is why these things are so important, is just be around other people. It's just good for you. It's just good for you to be amongst other people. You will tell yourselves it's not, particularly if you're a shy, introverted type who likes being at home with your headphones on and coding away, but it is just good for you to be amongst other people. So a really simple message. And at the top, actually just spend time on yourself. You could journal, you could write about it, you could talk to people about how you feel, and so on. But just spend time concentrating on you, okay? So we're going to use that. So that's just an example. Who remembers this? Who did Psychology 101? Yeah, Martin Pitt, yeah, thought so. Yep, SWOT. I really like this. And what I'm going to ask you to do at the end, or whenever you feel like it, is to complete your own one of these. I think as you get to a certain age and you've done so many courses and studied so many things, and little of it sticks, but occasionally bits and pieces do. I did a King's Fund Future Leaders course a few years ago, and I've forgotten most of it, but there was one bit that I come back to most days, and I talk to people about it when I interview them. When you go into an organisation, you are dependent on everyone around you. As you establish yourself, you've been there a year or two, you become independent. So this is, Jake, you're in my eye line. So you went into a new job, you're dependent on those people to learn about how that organisation works, who you're going to have good relationships with, bad relationships, what all the jargon means. As you start to learn all those things over a couple of years, you become relatively independent, and you could be an arse and use that to your effect and think, I can stop them doing this because I'm in control of these people. I'll decide when we schedule this piece of work or which business case we approve. So you have a bit of power, and it makes you, particularly if you're male, makes you feel like a big, clever idiot. But then the really hard bit, once you've become independent, is to become interdependent. And that is to get people who don't work for you to do what you want them to do. So that might be working across a region, working across a system, working across the NHS and social care. And little bits stick with you. And these are just some things that stuck with me. I really like Maslow. Most of you have probably seen this before. Self-actualization, to some extent, for me, is what I'm doing now. And it's lovely that you're there listening to me talk about what I'm interested in. I've self-actualized. This is me having a moment, self-actualizing, which is fantastic. I'm only able to do this because I've had plenty of food and drink, and I had a roof over my head last night, and I've got some friends and some family, and all those things need to kind of line up for you to actually do what you want to do. A lot of people come into work and get hassled to do some analysis at the top of this triangle, when in the bottom of it, they've got parents with dementia that they've been up all night wrestling with, and then they've had to remember to get the kids off to school and remember to put the PE kits in because it's Wednesday and so on. And by the time they get to their desk, that last little bit, which feels really important because everyone's jumping up and down their head, is actually quite difficult to manage sometimes because of all those bits below you. So just be kind of gentle on yourself, that if you actually get to a point where you're actualizing, you've had a lot of other things have come into place. So I quite like Maslow. I hope you like the photo. That was taken in my office last week. Here's a one you'll get tall. You'll have all seen this. Must do, should do, could do, potentially won't do. That's me most days. Better hair, obviously. But I suspect most of us walk into work thinking, Christ, which of these fires am I going to kind of fight today? And you'll start to organise your work a little bit like this, okay? This is something that stuck with me. Someone showed me this a few years ago. Quite like it. I think it's true. It doesn't matter if it's not. When you joined Google back in the day, you were told very, very clearly, we're a search company. You spend 70% of your time working on search, because we're a search company. We think we might like to launch a thing called Gmail and Google Maps and things. And we'll spend some of our time on that, maybe up to a day a week or so, maybe 20% of our time. 10% of your time, Friday afternoon, is the usual kind of anecdote, or Wednesday, whenever it is. You can do whatever you like, actually. If you come back to the head of Google with a proposal that Google should open a dry cleaning business, that sounds great. We're not going to do it because it sounds like a shit idea. But you only wasted 10% of your time on it, and that's fine. And if during that 10% of the time you had a bit of a laugh and you had a coffee with some friends, that's okay. But you may come up with something like that. So when they just started off as a search engine, DeepMind wasn't in people's heads as what they were kind of doing next. There was a people over there in the corner with BO thinking about it, and it became something. And they'd invested some time and energy into it, but it was okay. It was speculative, it was R&D, and the aim, within all of your roles, of course, is to carve out that time. So a conversation I had with Jeanette at lunchtime was, in the middle of that, automate all of your work that's possible to, because then I can free some of your time up to do actual analysis. What could we do? What could we do differently in the data warehouse? What could we do in Power BI? Which routines could we get from Sam Hollings to do all this stuff for free? What would that be like so that we could actually do some of that stuff that Peter and Stephen and people like me perceive you to be doing, all the interesting stuff all the time, which I'm sure is not true because you're wrestling with business cases to put hackers on and things like that as well. But we perceive other people to be doing the more interesting work. So if we can create some efficiencies, we can actually do some of the work that we're interested in. Okay. So you had Ben Goldacre here last year. If you're not sure what to do, just do what he said. I feel sorry for him because if you Google his report now, it says Johnson underneath it and Conservative, poor thing. And I think there was a frustration that he had where they asked him to write a 100-page report and then they asked for a 50-page report. So he did a 50-page report and then they asked for a 200-page report and kind of went backwards and forwards within it. But within it, there are some very, very, very clear messages that have to link to every one of the presentations you've seen over the last 2 days. So I sat in one presentation where someone had produced some amazing analysis and at the end said they wouldn't share it. And I was sort of sitting there thinking, I'm not going to be the dick in the room now that asks the question, but this all seems a bit awkward because that's not what Ben said to do. And any of the links through to GitHub and all of these things, they have to work and they have to be seamless and easy. I would think, and why I've put mindset at the top, is every time you start a piece of analysis, you have to have the mindset that you're going to proactively share all your work. And most of the time, that's probably not true yet. So I think people do a piece of work, then maybe write it out, then talk about it a bit, then realise that they've created a load of local idiosyncrasies around it, which make it harder to share, and they've manipulated the data and excluded a certain group of patients. And I would really encourage you to just take from what Ben produced that you'll proactively share all of your work, okay? You won't try and create a little bit of IP. If you want a bit of fame and a bit of ego, that's all good. That's all good. Peter can ask you to come and present at one of these things. We can do whatever it needs, but proactively share all of your work, okay? I should plug the National Competency Framework, partly because I think it's brilliant. So I include this, and you should go and see Siobhan's poster, which talks about what the National Competency Framework are doing, what FedIP are doing, what AFRA are doing. It's fantastic. This is relatively recent history, particularly that we've got a HACA, but particularly that we've got, people like Martin and others at the beginning of creating a proper reputation for the analyst community. It's relatively recent history. So the fact that we've got a national competency framework is brilliant. There's so much bad going on. It's lovely when there's something really, really, really good to celebrate. National competency framework, approach to professional registration, it's fantastic. It didn't exist till relatively recently. If it's useful, I've put on here my brilliant analogy, or metaphor, I don't know if it's an analogy or a metaphor, of the woodyard, where it's like a kind of an ETL process. And we talk in this language in our ICB. I suspect because I'm in charge, unfortunately, people just tolerate it. Fucking hell, this is such an ugly metaphor. But they kind of go with it because I'm in charge. But we use that language of, Irina, I need some different wood. It's called the mental health minimum data set. Go and find me a forest with that in. Bring it back to the woodyard and then stop. Because you don't need to do anything after that. Because Stuart is then going to organise it for me. He's going to cut it into planes of wood of different styles and shapes and plane those. And a team of carpenters, head of visualisation, is going to start to receive designs for different types of chairs, office chairs, garden chairs, domestic chairs, and build those. It's a brilliant analogy. That's why I've been invited to speak here. And you can all shove off. I think what this event does really well, and I think the challenge that Peter put down last year, which I think people have stepped up to this year to a greater or lesser extent, is the risk in everything that you do is you just do the bit that you're interested in and you don't see it through to the actual intervention. And we, myself and Tim and Lee at East Kent, we've got a nice little gig going where we have created relationships with some universities. We get master's students in. They do a bit of work for us in R or Python or wherever, deliver us a model. In theory, we take that model and we can kind of implement it. And when we spoke to one of the students who'd done this, and I said, this all looks great, what are we going to do with it? She kind of went, why are you talking to me still? What are you? I'm like, well, nothing happens as a result of you developing a regression equation. Nothing actually happens from there. Someone needs to select some patients and phone them and offer to give them a lift to the hospital and acknowledge that English is their second language and design a leaflet in a different way and remind them on the day and go and work with the traveller community to design an application that has no text in it where there is some illiteracy. Nothing actually happens on the basis of your algorithm. You have to deliver some change, which I think was the challenge Peter put up last year. So I would say to you, you might go, well, I don't care about that. I just really love learning Python. That's great, but hold yourself to account to go and do the intervention as well, because it's really nice and you'll see the fruits of your work. You'll just benefit from that. So I think the role of people like myself and others who've kind of staggered to somehow being in charge of kind of the analysts is to be able to commission people. So for me to be able to talk to Lee and say, this is what I want in lay language. The challenge is when Lee comes back with the results, and Tim and I and Lee are all chatting, is for me to understand enough conceptually about what he's done to challenge it. To say, why did you leave these patients out? Or is this, I'm going to say statistically significant, and I know roughly what that means, but I need you to prove to me that it's statistically significant, and so on and so on. And I'm going to use a series of statistical tests. I'll talk about some of them without knowing what they are, and some of them we'll know a little bit about, but we'll step through ever more complex ones. So mine will stop at kind of chi-squared and SPC chart, maybe a bit of regression. But when you stop, if you go off into a large language model and a neural network, or principal components analysis, I can ask you conceptual questions, but I will find it difficult to challenge you statistically. So that's an interesting skill set that we kind of need to think through. And then at the top, I then need to go and talk to, when Richard gave the keynote this morning, he made a really interesting point about a lot of kind of senior leaders in our world tend to be from kind of arts backgrounds, so tend not to be comfortable with some of these statistics. And I think that's probably true, but I think it's kind of gone too far the other way. So Jeanette working for me at the ICB would probably roll her eyes on a daily basis because an exec's gone, I don't like these graphs, can you just write 2 sides of A4 in Word? Like, that's Jeanette's afternoon gone. you're an exec. You need to understand what an SPC chart is. It's not that difficult. We'll talk through a little example if you want. How long does it take to get to work? About 20 minutes. If it was 21 or 19 minutes, it's about 20 minutes, so it doesn't matter. If about 20 minutes becomes an hour, that's statistically significantly different. Or if you flew here in a time machine, that feels different. Okay? Do you understand it now? Don't ask Jeanette to write 2 sides of A4. Just look at the SPC chart. So the role of that Chief Analytical Officer is to do that, is to challenge and have a voice at that table to say, don't be scared when the chart comes up that's got some numbers on it. Don't look at your phone until a chart comes on with some words on it. Engage in the data. It's reasonable for you to be able to do that at an exec level. If I may offer a slight challenge to some of the stuff that we see at these types of events, and I'm just being deliberately provocative because I'm the speaker and it's after lunch and your blood sugar's crashing as quick as mine is. When someone stands up and does a presentation, yeah, but you were waffling for a bit. I'll go 5. Okay, it's fine. We're bang on schedule. What you see a lot out of at these types of events, when people talk about inequalities, is you know what's coming. You know they're going to go to index and multiple deprivation, and you know that they're going to go to these census characteristics of ethnicity, which are not much more beyond white, black, and brown. Okay, we can do better than that. Okay, and I would challenge you to, when you start doing work on inequalities, by all means do a quick IMD quintiles if you need to, if you feel like you need to get it out of your system. But just try and do something a bit more interesting after that, okay? We have done some really interesting work looking at name profiling. So very recently, and I gave a talk on, which I think is on Future somewhere, called Eastern European doesn't equal Polish. Everyone assumed that all our Eastern European young mums were Polish. They probably were 15 years ago because people saw some extra shops opening up on the high street that sold Polish food and everyone was having their loft extension done. Those mums aren't Polish anymore. Some of them are, but a lot of them are Albanian. The highest group for us is Albanian in East Kent. Polish is about 6. So you start with Albanian, you get to Hungarian and Ukraine and Slovak and so on. There's some lazy, very, very lazy language, I think, and some of the analysis we do is quite lazy because of that. I was chatting, no, I can't see because I'm blinded here. But we were talking about, people might say we did some work on the traveller community. Well, if you say gypsy or traveller or Roma, they're completely different things. And they mean completely different things to different groups of people. And I think there's a sort of a laziness to some of our analysis. So I would challenge you with this triangle to step out of some of that lazy analysis that's been done before and think specifically about what you might do for a different population. And actually, at the top of it, just go and talk to some patients, because it's really interesting listening to what it's like for them. You know, we're doing some work with a Roma population on breastfeeding. I could not relate to that at all until I've actually now spoken to that group and kind of understand some of the different ways in which they use the health service. So I'll give you an awful statistic from one of our GPs in Margate who works with with the traveller population. She is convinced that no traveller patient has gone all the way through a spell of care. All the way through. So if you think if I went to GP, I've got backache, I'm a man in my 50s, they'd probably send me for an X-ray. I'd fuss because I'm middle class, and they'd send me for an MRI. I'd have some bloods done. I'd have a series of outpatient appointments. I might have a spinal injection. At some point, I might have a laminectomy, and I might have some work afterwards to get me moving again. That's quite a lot to organise. It relies not least on you being able to read. It relies on you being able to organise your time, to plan things. In that traveller community, we don't think we've done that once all the way through for a single patient. Okay. So a few bits that might be useful in putting your strategies together. We have, I'm doing some work on data strategy regionally and locally. So I asked people to send me their digital strategies, data strategies. Of course, as you'd expect, most of them I got sent were digital strategies, and on page 47 it mentions something about a data warehouse. And they're all really, really boring. They're really, really boring. And I think our jobs are full on. And I think if you boil this down to lay language, which is useful, I think for me that's much more useful. So we're going to write strategy, and it's going to be brilliant, of course. But I'm going to come back to 3 things, which I'll challenge these 2, for example, because they work there. Come to work with a smile on your face, okay? If you've had a row with someone else last night or you're hungover, that's for you. Do not come into a situation in a confrontational way, start off. Just come to work with a smile on your face. Because it's crazy, just prioritise your work constantly, but over-communicate with your clients as well. I'm really sorry I can't do that work now because this has come up, so-and-so's got COVID. Over-communicate with what you're doing. And the big thing that we want to try at East Kent and in NHS Kent and Medway is to introduce a concept of deeper learning. And I think a lot of us would be guilty of doing lots and lots of what we'd just call shallow working, lots and lots of emails, lots and lots of meetings, lots of people want to catch up. Should we just put a monthly catch-up in? I mean, we can do, but I will kill myself if I receive another request for a monthly catch-up to track something that I could kind of do in 2 minutes here. What's much more interesting is to get away to things like HACA, and then within your areas go, right, just half a day, turn your laptops off. We're going to think about taking all of our tools that work quite well on laptops and putting them on mobiles, or developing a new program for this Roma population. Everyone's brain's on it because it's going to be interesting, because it's different, but you turn your laptop on. You don't just sit there looking at your emails while I'm talking. Okay, that's a no, all right? Laptops off, phones off, concentrate, okay? Don't have to do it every day, but a couple of times a month, we'll pick a problem and we'll do that. The bit I'm supposed to be speaking about, can you give me 1 minute just to finish really quickly? Sorry. The meat of this, I'm going to speak about in the bit where I've run out of time. But I hoped all that was useful. The one key point to take away from this is, I think, and you would expect me to lobby, that one of the reasons we're in a bit of a muddle is because we've had a lot of people buying software for 10 or 20 years with no thought to data integration. So I will be deliberately provocative and say, depending on, and on the left there is the NHSE list of uses of data, things like direct care, planning, pop health, through to research. What are you going to do about local architecture that might already exist? Are you going to join in with the FDP? Are you going to join in with the SDE? Are the FDP and the SDE the same thing? Until those things are resolved, it's going to become quite politicized. And the key, last slide, is the title of the presentation. This is a big move, but there is a lot of, there's a lot of information out there. This is just Ernst & Young, but there's plenty of others. We are going to, and I was going to mention it on the next slide, we're going to write a kind of manifesto for the Chief Analytical Officer of the network, and it's going to be very, very strong on integration at the data layer. Because the mess we are in is because 2 trusts next to each other have put in the same PAS and go, isn't that brilliant, economies of scale, we put the same PAS in. I go, did you configure it completely differently with completely different data warehouses? Yeah, brilliant. We'll just call the wards 1, 2, 3. Why would you call them 1, 2, 3? They've got names. They've got names. There's a master file over here, and they're called Rotary. And so, just use that. Integrate at the data layer. If you take one thing away from me today, integrate everything at the data layer, okay? Because this mess we've got is 20 years of just buying software, and I'm going to have to map that to that because they call that this and we call it that, and they've got read codes and GPs, and we need to get it to SNOMED CT over here, and so on. Natural language processing and some elements of AI will help with that a little bit. But as you design things, you have to become a senior voice in this decision that says, we're not buying that piece of software because the data's locked down. We can't get access to data, or we are buying that one because we can get to the data. The integration has to be at that data layer. Okay, so I'll stop there because I'm out of time. Thank you, Kerry.
I think we'd all agree, well worth the run over and really inspirational. And one of the questions that did manage to get through on Slido was, how do we get more analysts as senior leaders? How do we make that happen?
Well, Sharon and Ronnie and myself have had a chat today about doing a a future CAO program of work. It still feels, it's relatively new in the sense that we've only been formally doing this for 6 months or so, but our roles have existed obviously for a while. I think the formality that things like AFA, things like FedIP, etc., bring to this is it's all good. So we are going to write a manifesto which is going to say, amongst other things, everything has to be shareable, we support professional registration, and so on. As those things become formalised, they help people position themselves for those senior roles, I think, so that you should get to a point where if someone's going for a vaguely senior role as an analyst, you should say, what's your approach to professional registration? I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, bye. Next. So we're coming quickly to try and fix it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So everybody, last round of applause for Marc. We're going to give it 5 minutes so that people can move on. We're talking more about, I think it's competency frameworks, isn't it, next? Competency framework in here. And by the way, we're now running on the internet, but not with Wi-Fi.